Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Vince is in the saddle, and we're looking at an article from Jon Boeckendstedt's admissions blog, and it's called, Why Were You Denied? Vince and I will be discussing that. And our question from a listener, Lisa and I will continue with our fourth part in a series of looking at students and parents who are disillusioned with the college admissions process. We're doing this so that you will not be disillusioned. In fact, Lisa and I just recorded that, and we added a fifth part, so that'll actually be a 5-part series, and this will be part 4 of 5. For our interview, we're continuing on with Andre Phillips, the Director of Admission at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and our topic is Understanding UW-Madison. And our college spotlight takes me back to my California trip in December, and we're looking at HMC Harvey Mudd College. Friends, I'm here with Vince from sunny Southern California. Hi, Vince.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. All right, so I told Vince, I said, Vince, I want to do the tip today. Can I do the tip and you do the commentary? And he's agreed. And so, you know how, Vince, we always beg, borrow, and steal copyright from each other? So that's what I'm doing for this one. So Peter Van Buskirk. I don't know if that's a name you remember from the past. You remember that name, Peter Van Buskirk?
Yeah. He offered me a job.
Oh, I guess you do know him. Was this in Franklin and Marshall or somewhere else?
Yes.
You do know him.
Yes.
Tell me that story.
So
you do know him.
It was my second job, and I was in a job search at Franklin and Marshall and Pomona. And I flew out there, and it worked really well. I got the job offer the day after I got back to Los Angeles. But I only had a day to decide.
Oh, wow. Really short.
And Pomona didn't offer until, 2 or 3 days later. But
so you held out and you got the Pomona offer. You bet on yourself, as they say, and it worked out.
It did. Unfortunately, he wouldn't wait. So I turned it down, hoping that I would get the job at Pomona, which I did.
Yeah, good stuff. Good story. So you definitely know who he is. So this is something I learned from him, and I like it. So I'm sharing it. I'm taking Peter's tip. So, you probably know this. Peter travels a lot. He does a lot of like the junior visit days and a lot of that programming. He used to do it for us at Westtown. And he likes to come into these meetings and say to parents, he says, can I ask you something? How many of you are doing exactly what you thought you would be doing at age 17? And then like very few hands go up. And then he says, you all kind of look like you turned out all right to me, right? You guys kind of turned out all right, sort of. It looks like it to me. And then he says, let me ask you something. Why are you putting so much pressure on your child to have to know exactly what they're going to do at 17 or 18 when you're not doing what you thought you were going to do? And I just thought that is such a powerful way of explaining to people, like, it's actually okay if your kid doesn't know what they're going to do right now, because you're probably not doing what you thought you'd be doing at 17. So that's my tip. Thoughts, Vince?
I think it's absolutely right, because I think what I'm doing currently, I didn't know existed. I didn't know that there was admissions offices or college counseling. So, and I didn't really become aware of it until probably the last, 3 or 4 weeks before I graduated from college. So it clearly was not something that I planned on doing, nor did I think I had the context to understand if I had known that the job existed, I'm not sure it initially would have appealed to me. I think initially what appealed to me about college counseling was the opportunity to travel and see different parts of the United States and talk about a place that I loved, but it wasn't. I mean, if you told me that, as a senior in high school, that that's what I would end up doing for the rest of my professional career, at that point, it wouldn't have resonated in the way that it did when I was a senior. So it definitely can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and the reason why I like it is because there's a certain student out there, and we've all worked with them. They're really feeling a lot of pressure. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's like a source of stress in their life. It's
Yes.
almost like I'm behind. Like, I'm behind and I have to figure this out. And sometimes it can come from, family and loved ones, or it can just come from different, whatever. Maybe your best friend has known that they wanted to be, an OBGYN since they were like 9. And now you're feeling like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And I'm 17. So to me, it's a liberator. And it's not just positive psychology, get in the right state of mind. It's the truth. It's the same way I always feel when I say it's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there, what you do when you get out of there. It's not like, this isn't like positive, get in the right mood psychology, pep talk stuff. Like this is truth serum here. And but I find it's a liberator. It takes pressure off. And certainly there's things you can do to help people, guide them along that path. But different people, that epiphany will happen at different times. And also we live in a time where a lot of people are going to do 4 to 6 jobs now in the course of their life. It's not the way it used to be where you do one thing for 40 years. Some people will do that, but a lot won't. So I like it because I think it just takes a lot of pressure off, and it kind of I like things that cause you to kind of look at things from a different lens than maybe you were looking at them before. So thanks to Peter. I stole your tip, Peter, but appreciate you, my friend. By the way, he did a great job on our podcast. If anyone wants to go back and hear a really good episode, he did an interview on, in the year 1 or 2, over 3 years ago now, on basically things admission officers won't tell you, ways in which they act as a business that's not in your best interest.
Yeah.
So that's this kind of thing, Peter. He's got a little iconoclast in him. He likes to break glass.
Yes, he does. And that was one of the first podcasts that really caught my ear, because you bring on interesting people into the mix. And I think he was talking about demonstrated interest. And that was the first time that I realized that colleges were tracking you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Most definitely. Most definitely. So our admissions vernacular, I'm going to use a term that Karen Christoph used 2 episodes ago when we talked about why Colorado College broke out of the rankings. And Vince, I'll have you tell our listeners what this one is. But she talked about how, I have a boss and I have goals. We have net tuition revenue goals that we have to meet, and we have compositional diversity goals. So Vince, what would compositional diversity refer to?
Compositional diversity could mean, in the way that I interpret it, I don't know exactly what it means,
Sure.
But it could be looking at other factors that include socioeconomic, geographic diversity, maybe talent-based. So if there's money, somebody is given money to start an orchestra program, then you need more musicians. So that could impact the way that the class looks, because you're going to put more weight on students who have the ability to play in the orchestra. Is that what it means?
Well, it's more what you said at first. The way you answered it first. Like, it's really kind of a broad term for the overall diversity of the class, right? It's not just race. It's not just class. It could be geography. It could be gender. It's all of the different stakeholders you have to please, and all the different types of kids that you really need to have in a class. And it could even be, in a place like CC, probably not as much as some places, but in some places it could even be sensitivity to interest in college major even. But really it's kind of a broad term for I need to think of the makeup of the class in a way that's going to be balanced and not monolithic and not homogenous. Right. So that really is pretty broad based, right? Because it's not just social class, but it is social class. You are looking at things like your Pell numbers and your first gen numbers. It's not just gender, but it is gender. It's not just race, but it is race. It's not just geography, but it is geography. And all of those, and every school can have their own individual goals. They're not quotas, but they're goals that you're trying to reach, and at least some semblance of what looks like balance to you, right? We always say that holistic admissions is social engineering, and so you're not just willy-nilly picking kids. You're intentional in thinking what does the makeup of this class need to be the most interesting, the most exciting, the best learning laboratory, so that people can learn from differences. So I don't know. I kind of really, I like the term. So good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a great term, and I think it comes into play at this time because there's often surprises. So I remember in January you were playing, or you had the interview from Colorado College, and she was talking about, their ED rounds and what it's like to get into Colorado College regular decision. And recently, one of the students that I had applied regular decision was admitted to Colorado College. And I would love to hear the compositional or receive a compositional understanding of how that student became one of the, 4% or 6% or whatever it was that
it was
they
like
admitted.
3.1. I think it's 3.1 this year. Yeah.
But I think that a large part of why this student was admitted was for those very reasons. It was where they were from. It was based on their life story and how successful they'd managed to be despite living in a state where many people were hostile towards what their identity was. So, I definitely think that plays a part, and it can play a part for colleges when they recognize how successful a student has become or is, despite the circumstances in which they had to do that.
I mean, I definitely know you're onto something there, and I definitely am not going to speak for CC because I wasn't in the,
right.
I was in a committee. But I do know this from just conversations with them and others, that schools look for people who are interesting and unique. And when you get somebody who is interesting and unique, and that could be a lot of things, that could be their point of view. It could be their life experiences. Maybe a kid lived in 6 countries by the time they were 15 because their parents worked for the State Department. And now you feel like they're going to bring this real international perspective. I mean, those are the kinds of things that make somebody pop in any low admit pool. It's what, like, who do we not have? Oh, we don't have a kid like this, And so I know that that's part of it, both from conversations I have with other schools as well as with CC. But once again, I can't speak for your specific kid because I wasn't in the room, but I'm sure that would be a part of it. Awesome. Good stuff. So our big number I'm taking right from our article today, and the number is 69, and there are 69 land grant colleges. Now, we've talked about this, the Morrill Act that got passed in 1862 that opened up all kinds of money for colleges to educate the masses. And our author, Jon Boeckenstedt, is another one we've had on the podcast, probably maybe less than a year ago. The vice provost at Oregon State, formerly at DePaul for quite a long time, another 40-year vet in the field. And with that, I'm going to just segue right into the article because he talks about this in the opening part of his article, these 69 land grant colleges that are not the ones that are being referred to here.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So the article is called "Why Were You Denied?" And what Jon says is that few people ever question why they were accepted. Nobody ever says that. Which is actually an interesting thing to think of. I never thought of that.
Amen.
Yeah, but it's always, the opposite. And then he says, I'm not talking about the 69 major research universities that the Morrill Act created that have admit rates of at least 60% and enroll over 200,000 first-year students. I was going to make that the big number, by the way. I didn't know whether to go to 69 or basically 200,000 first-year students that come from these land-grant colleges. And he starts out and he lists those land-grant colleges and he lists their admit rates all the way from like the 96.8s at the University of Wyoming to the 96.5s at Maine. And he lists all 69 of them all the way down to the 60s. He says, we're not talking about you. He said, we know the schools we're talking about, the ones everybody likes to talk about. And then he says, the ones when I'm speaking where people say, why is it so hard to get into? And he says, insert college name here. He refers to a panel he was on. He says, as soon as he hears this coming, he knows where it's going. Here it is. People say, how do colleges feel about X? And his first point is, there's no consensus view on anything. All right. There's different colleges with different perspectives. And it'd be helpful for people to know that. He talks about a colleague of his who had hired a consultant to help with their kids' college applications. And the consultant told the son that colleges like entrepreneurial students, so go start a business. And he said, well, it's a great example of how Campbell's Law manifests itself, chasing that elusive slot. Parents and students trying to make themselves look like what they think colleges want. And then he says, and I like this because it's kind of similar to a tip that we gave very recently on the podcast where we said, Michael Coleman, actually a listener in Connecticut, had sent it in, where he said, don't just expect to go to your reaches and your targets. Learn to like your likelies because there's too much in this process outside of your control for you to not be happy with your whole list. So it kind of reminds me of that. Boeckenstedt says here, he says, I have bad news for you. In college admissions at not the land grants, but those hyper-selective, we know those 1, 2, and 3 percenters, highly rejectives, call them what you want. Your ability to control things is far less than you think. And then he lists several things that you do not control. And so I'm just going to share about half dozen of these, Vince, and then I want you to take it wherever you want to go. So the first thing he says is you don't get to control who reads your file. And he says, guess what? The person who's reading your file, their dog might have just died. What kind of mood do you think they're in when they're reading your file? Then he says, guess what? They might really like your sarcastic irony take on things, or it might cause them to stop reading your file before they're finished with your essay. It's such a turnoff. Then he says, what about when your file gets read? He says, your file might pop up after the application of the student who just cured cancer. So they're like, oh my goodness, this kid isn't believable. Well, then they go to you, and now you're kind of not directly being compared, but the last memory was the superstar, and who knows how that psychologically affects how they read your file. Or the worst essay of the year. They might think it's the worst essay of the year. So he has different criteria. And then he says, you don't get control what other people say about you now. Here he's talking about recommenders. And he makes a really good point. He says, the recommender might think their application was glowing from the teacher. But in the eyes of the admission office, it might just be meh. It could be very average. You don't get to control that. How good of a rec writer were they? He says, you don't get to control if you were born with the athletics gene. And he basically talks about how, hey, if a student is going to be a starter from year one, I think their chances are very good they're getting in. He says you don't get to control where your parents went to college, and children of alumni get preferential treatment in many colleges. You don't get to control whether your grandparents have a name on a building on the campus. So you apply without a name on a building, and Barney Rubble IV has the library named after Betty and Barney Rubble Memorial Library, and they saunter right on in. There's got a little humor in here, which is kind of nice. And then he says something which we've talked about a lot, institutional priorities. But he also says you don't get to determine the college's preferences. And one point he specifically brings up is how they are looking at test scores. So he says at some colleges, standardized test scores are still really important, even if the college went through the test optional during the pandemic. And at some of those institutions, submitting tests can hurt you. At others, it can't. And he basically said, unless the school comes right out, like the MITs and Purdue's, and tells you that, you may never really know if they're really test optional or not. So we did a section maybe 2 months ago on how to know if a school is test optional or not, and 8 ways to know. And I think there were some real good pointers in there, but it wasn't completely exact and precise. You still had to make a lot of inferences. And then he says, you may not know how a college views the choice you made with your senior schedule. So, for example, one student might have taken 3 years of foreign language and is perfectly fine at a school. Another school student might have taken 2 years of foreign language, is perfectly fine. And then at another school, they want 4. And so how your senior schedule is perceived by colleges can vary tremendously. He goes on to say, the lesson here is you probably will never know why you were not admitted. And he also said it's usually not one single factor. And you also won't know if you just barely missed or if you missed by a country mile. He says, perhaps the cruel but poignant lesson that will be repeated many times in your life. Sometimes things just don't go your way. Sometimes the ball just doesn't quite bounce the right way. And then he says, even when they don't, usually things will turn out fine. So Vince, take it where you want to go. This is from his blog, by the way.
Yeah, it was a great article. It's very timely. Students will have received their decisions by the time they hear this podcast. So there are many questions being answered. The first one I wanted to address was the name on the building. And I have a good story about that one. I had a student many years ago who wanted to apply to Stanford and wanted to go to Stanford. And the family did have a building on the campus named after the family. But they were told during the process of the application that because the immediate impact was that many of the siblings of that particular family had been admitted to Stanford, and that because when the gentleman who had donated the money for the library had passed away, the money got split up in the family, and so therefore the campus Stanford felt that they had done their due diligence and admitted the immediate family, but everyone afterwards wasn't going to have the resources to donate a building.
Sure.
So Stanford was done.
Right.
And in fact, he wasn't admitted. But the great thing about it is that this particular candidate ended up going to Brown and never looked back. But I just thought it was so funny that they said, well, the money's no longer going to be a factor, so we're done. And it was very clear to the family and to the student what the priority was.
Yeah, I think that the one thing I like about this article is people can beat themselves up when they don't get in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Start that whole self-flagellation process. And when you start to look back and realize like how much is out of your control, how much you'll never know, how much you really don't know what the needs of the institution were, I actually think it can be encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I like to say, and I can't remember who first told me this, but I've been saying it for over 20 years. And I find that it's helpful for students when they're denied, which is to remind them they don't know you. All they know is your file.
Yeah.
So they actually didn't really deny you because they don't know you. They just didn't accept your application file, which is just a sliver of who you are. And I found that's really encouraging to people to sort of take the blunt off of the rejection. And I I sort of feel like the overall tone of this article is doing that. Like, stop the self-flagellation. There could be so many reasons. Like one of the ones he used, I like the reader's dog might have died and they might have been in a funk that day. And maybe if they even read, I mean, I don't want to make admissions sound so completely arbitrary, because there's a fine line there. Like, we know decisions are not random, and we know a lot of forethought and foresight goes into them. And we know a lot of times readers have a lot of training on how to read a file and rate a file. And so I don't want to make it go to the other extreme and make it sound like, oh, had a good lunch, you're getting in. Had a bad lunch, you're getting denied. Like, I don't want to, I don't make it sound like that. But there really, really are, lots of factors outside of your control. And so why beat yourself up over that? And, I was having a really good conversation with a family I'm working with in the Pacific Northwest. And the mom said something really, really important. She said, I support all this attention to find the right fit and match and go through this process and really put the research into schools. But when I think back of all the kids that I went to high school with, they went to all these different colleges, she said, for the most part, everybody really had a good experience.
Yeah.
And the reason why I like that is because what it puts an emphasis on is that, like, college is what you make of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yes.
you really get to control your happiness. Don't like a major? Maybe you switch. Don't like a professor? Learn what it was about that kind of professor that's not a good match for you so that you pick other professors that are different. First roommate didn't work out? You didn't betroth anything to that person to be stuck with them for life. You've got the flexibility. Pick a different roommate. Joined a fraternity, it wasn't for you. Didn't sign a lifetime contract. Tried a club, it wasn't for you. Look at the other clubs. And, and I'm not always encouraging people to just, what's the term, bait and run right away, cut and run right away. Like, sometimes you have, sometimes you have to stick it out too. And when you stick it out, you'll find it's a little better. But the point is, choice. Every college is going to have some kids you like and some you don't like, some professors you like, some you don't like. Some days the food's good, sometimes it's not. Part of success in college is learning how to navigate the options that are available to pick selections that are best aligned with who you are. And so wherever people end up, there's an opportunity to, let's say they're not happy with their options coming out of high school. So in their mindset, they're a little downcast at their options. So let's just call that a lemon. There's an opportunity to take that lemon and turn it into lemonade. There really, truly is.
Yes, I agree.
Any final comments, Vince? This is a short and sweet one.
It's interesting. I think that this process really lives up to the name of March Madness. We talk about college admissions in terms of March Madness. You have to give space for the randomness. And this is what Jon is talking about. You may think you know why someone didn't get in. You may wonder why, just as we did in the conversation right before this about how that student got into Colorado College regular decision. And I would love to be a fly on that wall. But are there ways that we can help students find a list where they love the reach, the 50-50, and the likely?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do they turn that around and make that experience the best is where the randomness goes away if the student really embraces the options they do have and marches forward knowing that the colleges that did recognize their potential are going to nurture that if the student commits themselves to that institution. So I love this article because it really does reflect if you take advantage of those who recognize your potential, you can really find the happiness and success that you're looking for.
Yeah, and there's another implication in here, which he didn't come hard with it, but he could. Don't judge others who got into a school you didn't get into. Because Vince and I hear all too much of that. Like this school doesn't know what it's doing. It took this kid. I was way stronger than that kid. How do you know, first of all, what was in their application, and how do you know what the school is looking for? You don't know either one.
Right.
Okay, you might know their class rank, or you might know their test scores. That's a very small portion of who they are as a person. You can't export from that and think that you know what value they bring or don't bring. I mean, I realize it's a lot of ego preservation there. That's a way of trying to assuage bad news and not feel bad about yourself, is to convince yourself that the school made a mistake and they just didn't make good judgment and they took a weaker person over you. But there's smacks of ego there and not respecting the competition and not valuing other classmates that just kind of rubs me wrong. Because I think that's part of it. If you're going to say don't, understand the reasons you're never going to know why you were denied necessarily. You're not going to know why certain people are accepted. Rather than cast aspersions on that, just accept it. Accept that there's things I will never know about this process. Sound like you want to say something, Vince?
No, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And I think that part of the reason that he wrote this blog was for people to have the awareness and perhaps have some flexibility in where they apply, because as you move forward with a list that's balanced, if it is balanced, then you're going to have some options. And without creating that balance in your list and sort of expecting that and you're right about the ego. If you expect to get into every school that you apply to, then you aren't really respecting the competition. And I think, the fact that Princeton beat UCLA, and I was sitting in that space to watch that, and I was sitting there,
California.
I was sitting in Sacramento watching Princeton beat, I don't know, was it Missouri? I don't remember.
Oh, they beat Arizona.
Yeah,
that was a 15 versus a 2. Yeah.
But watching those two initial games and seeing that Princeton crowd, they didn't sit down for 1 minute, just like the team. Like, I've never seen enthusiasm like that. So I think you're right, Mark. You need to respect the competition and not imagine just because, Arizona has all the resources, UCLA has tremendous resources that they spend on that team. All those resources don't necessarily come into play when the enthusiasm in which the Princeton players exhibited in those two games that I saw was incredible. So don't count yourself out, but definitely respect the competition that you face.
Another thing he said in the article, which I never quoted in my summary, but he talked about a student in New England on his travels that was asking if they could maybe break away from like the AP curriculum and take this interesting course, and how that was going to look, how that was going to look to colleges. And his response was, I think that's the wrong question. The point is, she was saying, should I change it and not take the course that I want to take? And his point is, I think you should be asking which colleges will accept you for who you are and you really want to take it. So find the colleges that match up with what you already want to do. And the reason why I bring that point up is, I know this is painful and this is probably hard. It's probably not what everybody wants to hear. But one way of looking at places that you don't get in is that they didn't value who you were and what you brought to the table, or feel like they needed you or whatever. And the places that you did get in, they really want you. So like, go with the going crowd. Something I like to do when I organize events and gatherings and things when I'm leading. I used to really get upset. Like, why is nobody here? Like, we're about to start and whatever. It's supposed to be 20 people RSVP. There's only 8 people here. And then one of the things I learned over time was go with the going crowd. Like, I'm not going to punish this group that's on time. Let's start on time. They are here. And I'm not going to obsess over why the 12 people that RSVP didn't show up. I'm going to go with the group that did. And I think there's something there as well. Like, you can cry over spilt milk about where you didn't get in, or you can look at where you did and you can say, you know what? These schools wanted me for who I was. There's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for going where you felt the love. And I realize that that's an oversimplification because at a lot of highly selective places, they would love to be able to admit more kids. It's just a space restriction thing. And it's not like they didn't like you. They're just not limited spaces. I get all that. But still, from a human emotion standpoint, like go where, go to the prom with the person that wants to take you to the prom rather than obsessed with the person you keep asking that keeps blowing you off.
Right, exactly. And I think that in this last week, as we hear from the most selective places, it may feel like the person you've always, had a pining for may say no. But the person who invited you, on March 1st to the prom, you've kind of been putting on hold. It's a point where you want to go with the person who's excited to be with you rather than the person who's kind of held you at bay forever and then they still say no. Keep in mind that that the person who's excited was excited for a reason and that they recognized who you were and your potential. And maybe give them a shot if you think it's a good match. But in this last week, I think there are definitely going to be people looking at what who didn't make the offer, where they didn't get in, but rather than focus on the schools that gave them the time and the intention and the opportunity to attend. So take another look. You'll be hearing the podcast in April when you're thinking about decisions. So I for one definitely hope that students make decisions about where to go based on who's excited to see them.
And that's the drop the mug moment. Thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
See you next month, my friend.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, hopefully you've enjoyed this series where we're looking at students or groups of students or parents as well that are disillusioned with the college admission process. We're going to finish up our fourth group and get into our fifth group and our sixth group. And we have decided to add one final part. So next week we'll return with our last group, our seventh group. Listen and enjoy. So Lisa, I don't know if you remember this because it's a little memory test here. It's kicking you back about 5 months ago.
This is not good for me.
More than 5, now that I think about it. It was last summer. Do you remember me saying on the air that Karis was in London, England? But I can't tell you.
Yeah,
I can't tell you why she's there.
Actually, because my mother-in-law was here and she spent like a lot of time watching like one of the iterations of the Great British Baking Show, which reminded me of that conversation and wondering if that's what Karis was up to.
That's what she was there for. So those of you listening, Karis is my daughter, and she's one of these people who wears a bunch of hats. I know she works with several of our listeners as a Spanish tutor. She has a Spanish tutoring business, but she also has this passion for baking. So she went to LA for this bake. She had to win this trip to LA, which she did. Then she went to LA and they picked like the top 2 from there and she won that. So she got 6 weeks, all expenses paid in London last summer to be on this show called the Great American Baking Show. And a lot of people have heard about it, but you know me, I'm as bad on baking shows as I am on movies. So you know what that means.
The American one or the British baking show?
This is the American one. There's the British one too. It's called the Great American Baking Show. So, but she swore me to silence because she could have got $100,000 fine if somebody found out. Although she was telling everybody, but she was shushing me. But anyway.
I can't imagine why. But anyway, go on.
So here's the cool. I'll just jump right to it. The show is going on Roku on May 5th. And here's the cool thing, we're all in Raleigh for Joy's graduation. So we'll be there. My brother Norm will be there. My sister Kathleen, my mom, obviously Joy. So we're all going to be able to watch the first show. So what I understand about these shows, it's almost like you get knocked off the island and they start out with a certain group and then they keep.
Survivor, but baking.
Yes, Survivor baking. So for those of you who like the Great American Baking Show, if you want to see my daughter, she'll be on there on May 5th on Roku. So anyway, that's why I couldn't say anything.
My mother-in-law loves that show, so she will be watching and wait till I'm
Cool.
gonna call her after we're done and tell her that I know someone in the show. She's gonna lose her mind. So,
And I think you said Lily likes that too.
oh yeah,
Was it
Lily
Lily?
loves
Yeah.
baking shows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Now, before we dive in, we're doing this series on people disillusioned in the college admission process. I want to just say something I already said before, but I just feel the need to reiterate it. So the last point we talked about was just how competitive it is for particularly white females and overrepresented Asian American populations, especially coming from really highly represented states. But I still just want to say something that's really important to get to get this right nuance. It is statistically much harder for people coming from rural communities, Native American communities, inner city communities. They have a much lower percentage chance of getting in these schools. And so that can be true, while it's still also true that these schools have an inordinate number of high flyers when it comes to curriculum, test scores, GPAs, coming from particularly certain Asian populations and certain Caucasian communities. And I say certain because this is highly, highly, highly correlated with social class. This is coming from parents usually that are educated and affluent. And so they, all the evidence is there that shows there's such a high correlation between high income levels, high education levels, and high achieving kids. It makes sense because you've had 18 years to do everything to set the absolute right stage. And parents are ultimately the biggest teachers. So both things can be true, right? And I want people to know that, because if you're overrepresented, then one, you can adjust expectations and you can also build appropriate college lists. But I also don't want to apply that it's so much harder for that group than it is for groups that have, so much more distance to travel that they really rarely ever even get into the conversation. So, you know what I mean? Both are true. And I think it's important to sort of elevate both.
It's sort of where is the obstacle? And I think maybe for, some of the people you've been talking about with educated, affluent parents, and maybe they're in overrepresented states or certain overrepresented groups. I mean, that's their obstacle comes at the end. Whereas somebody, let's say, who's Native American, their obstacle starts at the beginning, and a lot of times it throws them off. They never even get to the end. So
that's a good way of putting it.
You're just not seeing it. You're not seeing all those people who got knocked off, who would have been, great candidates for these schools had circumstances been different.
Yeah, and one reason I don't talk about them as much is because they don't even even get into the applicant pool. So they're not even ever a part of the conversation. So they're not really going through the disillusionment because they don't even get there.
Yeah, their disillusionment's on a more profound level, I would imagine. We're not even being able to get to these places.
Yeah, my famous orchestra illustration, right? So we think of building a class like assembling an orchestra. So, the talented white female from New York or New Jersey or Connecticut or Palo Alto or someplace, they're like that 10th talented violinist trying out for the orchestra, but they already have 8 or 9 amazing violinists and they're looking for bassoonists and harpists and oboists. Where that rural kid or the inner city kid, first gen, they're not even trying out for the orchestra at all. So they're not even in the conversation. So that's why I didn't sort of create a category for them, because most of the time they're not even experiencing the disillusionment because they may not even know there's an orchestra tryout, Mm-hmm. They're just not even in the. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that, because when we're talking about such complex issues, I think it's really important to try as much as we possibly can to get the right nuance. And I sort of felt like I needed to elevate both of those things to get the right nuance. So not sure if that's helpful, but needed to get it off my chest to feel like I did justice to the conversation.
Justice has been done.
All right, cool. So then let's switch to the fifth group. So the fifth group are students that are applying to out of state to, let's just call them well-known, famous flagship schools. And a lot of times students just have no idea how much more competitive it is for an out-of-state student versus an in-state student at these schools. So I looked up 13 of the most competitive public schools in the country. Michigan, right where you are, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, UVA and William and Mary, both in Virginia, University of Florida in Florida, University of Texas, Austin in Texas, both Georgia Tech and UGA in Georgia. And then in the state of California, UCLA, UC Berkeley, UCSD San Diego, and UCI Irvine. All four of them. With Santa Barbara, I could almost really add them too. They're almost as competitive as the first four. And then Wisconsin. So do you want to know one thing every one of those schools has in common? Lisa, trick question.
Is it a cap on out-of-state residents?
It's a cap on out-of-state. You get the award. Bingo, bingo, winner, chicken
what
dinner.
Do I win? Maybe
Chicken
Karen
dinner.
can bake me a little something.
Yeah, she can bake you a cupcake.
Dinner.
Take a Karis cake. They're very good.
Cake. I am sure.
Yeah, I know she'll be doing a serious cake for Joy's graduation. So you live close by. We'll have to get you a couple slices.
All right.
So let's just look at some of these caps. So, Michigan, they're committed to being 51% from Michigan, 49% from the rest of the country. North Carolina, 82% from the state, 18% not from the state. I don't know if I had a dream. Did I have a dream that they switched that to 19 or 20?
That's for certain schools. Certain schools
Okay.
in the UNC system that are under-enrolled have been raised up to 20. And I think that's like Eastern Carolina, Western Carolina, UNCA. I don't know if Wilmington might be. I have to go back and look at that one.
Mm-hmm. But it does not apply to Chapel Hill still.
No.
Yeah. So that's at 18% versus 82. University of Virginia does this 1/3, 2/3 thing. And then Florida only takes 10% from the rest of the country, 90% Florida. UCLA, UCSB, and UCSD, 18% can come from outside of the state of California. So they know that their yield's going to be lower out of state, right? Because people are more likely to stay home. So I don't know exactly what their MIT numbers are. I don't know if they're 25 or 30, but still, there's a cap. And then Georgia Tech takes 30% out of state. Georgia takes 20% out of state. And then Wisconsin, our current interview, they do 55-45. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at some numbers. Georgia Tech. Let me give a caveat before I give these numbers. So some of the numbers I'm giving you are 2023 numbers. Some are 2022, and a couple are 2021. So I used the most recent ones I could find. And they're mostly 2022 and 2023, but there's a couple 2021s in here. So Georgia Tech, 34% admit rate. In-state, 14 out-of-state. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, around the corner from you, Lisa, 41% in-state acceptance rate, 14% out-of-state. And those are the 2022 numbers. Okay. Then you have Florida, 46% and 28%. And I read somewhere, but I just couldn't verify. I was trying to find again that it's down to 20 this year. But anyway, I know for sure 46-28 was 2022 numbers. And then UGA, you've got 40 in-state, 24 out-of-state. Those are new numbers. And by the way, UGA just put their cap in place this year. They never had a cap until this year, 80-20. So they just got so many more out-of-state apps that they put this cap in place. Michigan, this is last year's numbers, and I swear this number went down because Michigan, and I've been networking with other counselors, and I know our own experience, to me, was the hardest public school to get in this year. But anyway, 42% and 20% for Michigan. Texas, Austin. Oh, I don't think I skipped Texas, Austin. They are the lowest. They only take 8% out of state. They take 8% out of state, 2% international, 90 from Texas. So 42% admit rate in-state, 15 out of state. UVA, 36% and 19. And then UW-Madison, 68-55. William and Mary, 48-32. So the average person doesn't know that. And these are extremely popular schools. And so, I mean, Lisa, how many times do people say, I want to apply to UNC, to UVA, UCLA? Like, we hear it all the time, all over the country. And then their really, really, really sharp kids are like stunned that they are like flat out denied or waitlisted. So any thoughts on this one?
No, I think it's really it's important to keep that in mind when you're making your list, especially if you're out of state for one of these schools, because you see a lot of broken hearts with that. Michigan is notorious for breaking people's hearts. I feel like,
They're pretty bad.
and in Illinois, where I moved from, Wisconsin was not far behind. They had enough northern suburban Chicago kids for their liking, and you had to be really exceptional to get in there. And so many people wanted to go. It's a great school.
Yeah, so it's just, once again, we're going over this disillusionment, not to discourage, but so people can not be disillusioned. Where you tell share in every case there's disillusionment, it's because a group's overrepresented. And when you're overrepresented, it's a higher bar. And so if you're going to be overrepresented, then you need to make an adjustment to both your expectations and to your list. All right, so let's move on to number 6. So number 6 is students that don't realize how competitive the major is that they're applying into.
It's a big one, yeah.
It's a big one. I mean, we always talk about computer science because it's just gotten ridiculous, but it's other majors too. I mean, you can see it with business, you can see it with film, and a lot of programs in the performing arts and visual arts. You can be super competitive. Singing and just some of those places don't have many spots at all. Ballet and modern dance is brutal at a lot of the schools that students are most interested in applying to. Nursing can be another one. For some places, psychology.
Oh, psychology has become brutal at these places.
I know.
It's just, I was looking at, I can't remember which school it was. Maybe it was William and Mary. I was doing an info session, but yeah, like the psychology admission rates were like half of everything else. I was shocked as a psychologist, like
Sure.
to see that. Number one, that so many people wanted to go into it. Number two, that it was so popular.
Well, yeah, psychology is super popular. I know that's my undergrad degree is in psych. It just seems cool understanding people. Well, I mean, a lot of people don't know NC State. They think engineering is going to be their lowest acceptance rate, and it's psychology. And the place that's really competitive is Texas Austin. Now, 4 years ago, a senior level person there told me this was pre-COVID. If you don't have at least a 34 ACT, you're done. Like, don't even waste your time in sending some. And that was not like, okay, you're getting in. That was almost like an implicit cutoff.
Yeah, we have to we'll consider you at 34.
Yes. Yeah, but 33, no. I don't think that's something that they probably would say at an information session. It's probably something somebody's telling me off the record because they're trying to get me to refer the right people. But yeah, so this is another place where there's just a lot of disillusionment. And so the question is, what do people do about this? Well, this is a good place to do some research, and you can do internet research. These are good questions to ask reps. They're completely appropriate questions to ask reps. These are some of the fields I'm in. Do you admit by major? Or do you admit even by school? What's the competitiveness like in this major compared to, those are fair questions. And certainly you can do good old internet research can dig a lot of this stuff up. But if you don't know this, you're in for a, like sometimes rough ride. Like sometimes people will tell me this with Maryland. Maryland is really tough with computer science. I'm like, didn't get in Maryland with my 1560 and my 39. Yeah, you applied as computer science. Now, a lot of schools will let you do the pick 2 major things. Mm-hmm. And that can be really helpful. And you'll get in your second choice if you don't pick another killer. That's why they do that, because they'd like to be able to admit you, but you may not be admissible for that particular program. But just informing yourself about what the competitiveness is like for your major, particularly for schools that admit by major. And, there's other schools that don't admit by major, but they kind of know within their school that they're overrepresented in certain majors, and it's still a factor. Like when I was at Pomona, they talked about that. Pomona doesn't admit by major, but officially, the way that you see more with universities. But they're very much aware of their undersubscribed majors and places where the classes are small and, and ones where they're getting too many and the kids can't get in. And so it can kind of be a factor even a lot of times at those schools as well, even the ones that don't admit by major or admit by college.
Yeah, I was on a counselor call and somebody was saying, well, I had this student who wasn't that strong, but they got in everywhere they applied. and they applied some rather selective places, but they were an education major. And the other counselor said, well, yeah, because they need butts in seats for education and they're not getting it right now. So, of course, this person was very valuable to them because they want to keep those education departments open so we can have teachers in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just really interesting. But if she had tried to apply as a psychology major, I'm sure she would have had a very different experience.
Yeah, I was talking to a student this week that was admitted to SLO, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And I have to admit, I was really surprised. I really did not think this student was getting in. And we talked a lot more. And then they said, I think it might have had to do something with my major. And then when they said what their major was, it was like they hardly get any place. And that's a school that does. You have to declare a major as part of their admission process. And so sometimes I feel a little awkward talking about this because I'm not a believer in what some college coaches do where they try to, okay, we'll start in the 7th grade and make you a German major. And because we know that's an undersubscribed major at this school and it's about to die out and that's not even what you want to do. So, there's always going to be somebody that's going to be willing to sort of try that angle. A lot of times it won't work. A lot of times schools can see through it. Although I do have to admit that if somebody starts early enough with it, they can probably make it work. They might hate their experience because they're doing things they don't want to do.
To what end,
I know. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. To what end? I agree. Yeah. That's not only, to me, unethical because it's misrepresenting yourselves to the school, but it's not in your own best interest. It's the equivalent of go work an unfulfilling job for 6 years to maybe get a chance to do XYZ. Like, sorry, those are important years I don't want to waste.
Well, and if you really want to be a computer science major, but you apply as an education major, number one, you probably won't be able to transfer into the computer science department once you get there. And number two, you won't be doing what you want. It's better to go someplace where, you can get a seat in the computer science department and study what you love than to go someplace theoretically more prestigious. I don't know. I just don't think we should live life for admissions counselors might think of us.
I agree 100%. And not only that, I'll add another thing. The whole idea of faking you're interested in an area that you're really not interested in to try to get into a highly competitive school, admission officers completely have their antenna up for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, listen, are there people that can dupe admission officers? Yes, especially if you start early enough and just completely fake your whole resume. But a lot of times, most people aren't doing that, right? They're starting this thing. A lot of times, their antenna is up for that. They see through it. Case in point, Wharton. Sometimes I'll work with students who really want to go to the Wharton school, but they're advised you're not getting in Wharton. So they'll think, I'll just go in economics at Penn. Boy, Penn will shoot those kids down so fast. Deny. Like, they see through it. You really want to be a business major, but you didn't think you'd get in Wharton, so you thought you'd try to apply to arts and sciences. They just have their antenna up. And I've actually had several Penn admission officers share that. Like, we see that a mile away. I could say the same thing for WashU and many, many other schools. So in addition to all the other reasons, it usually doesn't work.
Right. So that's not a good plan.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
For our interview, we're continuing on with Andre Phillips, the Director of Admission at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and our topic is Understanding UW-Madison.
Because you only have so much space, and you only have so much time, if you will, the metaphor of the audience for a moment. I've only got a couple minutes to give. In this moment, I tell you, Mark, you're getting a lot of my time. So I say that just simply to say for students, just think about your audience and make everything matter, and make it about your aspirations. And aspirations, oftentimes, rarely are they complete when you aspiration is just that. Here's what I imagine will happen. This is what I want to make happen. Here's what I'm working towards. it's incomplete. And it's okay to be incomplete in what you aspire for, but you know where you're going. And this is not in the 5, but I say this both for the extended essay and the why essay. Why are you interested in School X? Have fun with it, right? I can read an essay. I can read a why am I interested, and I can tell the difference between this is what I was told to do, and I'm formatting it based on what some guidebook said, or versus someone said, hey, listen, I just got to tell you, right? I might not have done as well as I should have or could have in math, but here's what I learned about being in that class and learning from Professor Stucker and teaching me how to do this. And I'm still working. There's some genuine excitement in that. If students can write that way. I mean, you hear this all the time from admissions folks. Don't try to be funny if you're not funny. It's not going to work. And be careful what you say and what stories will. All of those things are true. But here's what is absolutely true. For those of us who read essays, we can tell the difference between whose voice is speaking. And we can tell when students are really excited about something versus, dare I say it this way, are feeling compelled to say certain things. And that essay is one thing, but that personal statement, that why, is another. 2 different kinds of writing.
I'm really glad you took time on that and did it with some detail, because I will routinely ask schools what percentage of your applicants are academically qualified, can do the program. And when I'm talking to, somewhat selective schools more, it's usually 75% or higher is the number that I'll hear, somewhere in that 75 to 85 range, depending on the school. And so what you're really saying is we have a lot of people that we look at the transcript and the testing and the grades and the grade trends, and we know you could do the program. But what you need to do is you need to convince us that you're a good match for our institution and you're going to come and thrive here and take advantage of what we have to offer. And that's your opportunity to do it.
Absolutely.
And our regular listeners know I feel so strongly about this, the importance of the college-specific questions, that one of my pet peeves is when people call them supplements, because they're not secondary. And supplement implies that you're kind of, and we know that so many times students put all the effort into the personal statement and they blow off the college specifics. And I think language is important. And if we're going to call them supplements, we kind of imply that they're not that important, when in reality they really are, because this matching process is very important, because at the end of the day, you're trying to bring in people that are going to thrive, and that aren't going to be disillusioned.
Yeah, no question about it. And I appreciate you being on your soapbox about that one, because I don't do nearly as many presentations as I once did in my career, but I would always spend more time on the writing, and this notion about everything you do matters, right? We might say it's optional, but optional doesn't mean that it's not important. It really means we're going to give you an opportunity. Hint, hint, here's your opportunity to take an extra step. And the fact that we're giving you this optional opportunity means you probably should not pass it up, right? Because the next application, that student may have taken advantage of something you took a pass on. And there's more to that. In the interest of time, I'll stop there. But I think your core point is a really important one, Mark. There's nothing that's secondary. First off, so I am going to go here for a moment. First off, there's only so many pages that students can affect, right? Mm-hmm. There are pages that their recommenders and their counselors can impact, but students only have a handful of pages, right? And so anything that says supplemental, that's the trick question. So folks want to know, well, do applications, they try to trick you or trip you up or anything? No, unless they are saying something is kind of optional. It's, that one you have to be aware of. So we are kindred in how we think about these limited number of pages that students themselves, or if you will, the first voice. And that's how I like to think about the application. Student voice is always the first voice. Might not be the first one we get to, but it's the first one in the application. Let me say two other things very, very quickly. Number one, I didn't touch on, but I want to spend 10 seconds on, and that's the extracurriculars.
Mm-hmm.
And schools will ask in a variety of ways. Here's my suggestion to students. The most important thing you do, and students, you can figure it out. Oh, I do a lot of things. What's most important? You need to ask yourself that, and then when you get to the application, that's what you put as the most important. You can list the other 9 things you do and the fact that you never sleep on the weekends or whatever that story is. You can list what is the most important. Because truthfully, and I'm going to expand this beyond just UW-Madison here, you can pretty much bet that schools are trying to imagine, well, what will they contribute outside of the classroom? Maybe they would contribute these things inside of the classroom, but how are they going to structure and live their lives in our community? And if you are a sports enthusiast, maybe you've played, or maybe you've actually been a part of the cheer squad, or maybe you just like being in the stands, or whatever it is, elevate that so that we know. I pick on sports, but it could be any number of things. You write for the school paper, you're on the yearbook club, or you started the environmental club, or any number of, if it's important to you, like really important, and potentially you'll continue it or want to pursue it once you get to a university, that's the first thing we're going to see. And we're going to try to figure out, how do you invest? What have you done? What difference does it make? You have the opportunity to elevate that. Last thing I'll say about the page, folks want to know, well, what about my extracurriculars? If you spend time and you care about the results, you've done some things, we want to know. And in a similar way, when you think about recommendations, and I trust your listeners have heard this before, it doesn't always have to be from the person who gave you the best grade, but it should be from a person who can speak to how you've traversed the community of learning during the time you've either been in that class, or maybe you've taken a teacher more than one time, and one would hope that you're a better student as a high school junior or senior than you were as a first year, or maybe you started out good and you've been, whatever the story is, find folks who can story tell on your behalf. Maybe, and I use math all the time because that was not my subject. I should say it's still not my subject, but that's a different story. But the idea that you can find someone who will say something of substance is really what we're looking for.
Awesome.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Today's recommended resource is Handshake, an online platform for college students to find internships and job opportunities. Since it's aimed at college students, you do need a .edu email address to join, and the jobs listed are specifically for early career applicants. It provides students with a huge database of employers explicitly seeking college students and recent grads. In addition to job search, students can create profiles highlighting their academic and work experience and upload their resumes. Handshake also has a knowledge base that provides free career advice resources. Some colleges do use Handshake to highlight positions where employers are only interested in their school students. Students can explore and create an account at joinhandshake.com.
Any new initiatives going on at UW-Madison, either strategic plan or things you see coming over the next 5 to 10 years that people looking at the school might want to be aware of?
Great question. So let me say two things. Number one, our chancellor is in month 6, I believe. So,
Newbie.
and pardon me?
Still a newbie.
Still a newbie, still learning. And so there's this grace period. But here's what I will say about, and I start with our new chancellor. I mean, leadership on down starts with the chancellor. In the relatively brief time that Chancellor Mnookin has been here, Chancellor has taken the time to get to know the university. And for folks who've been here for more than a minute, I'm approaching year 12. One has to respect that I would imagine Chancellor Mnookin has some real ideas about the direction the university should go and what they would desire in time, but did not lead with that. Really made it clear that this is not the place that they were at previously. It's certainly not the role they were in. So real appreciation around that. So with that in mind, here are 3 things that are top of mind. Number one, institutionally, we continue to think deeply about what direction forward will be required once the SCOTUS decisions are rendered for the North Carolina and the Harvard cases, believing that there will be impact, but it's too soon to know. And so all we can do is be prepared as a campus community, and Chancellor Mnookin is at the head of the table there. So that's on the horizon. We are prepared to continue to be in the scholarly space the best we can possibly be. Here's the second, and I, in some ways I mentioned this, so I'll return to it. We have a mix of deans who've been in place for a few years and at least one new dean in our College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. And so it's exciting in a way to have one of our staple schools have new leadership. And so we're braced to learn, again, as our new dean is grappling and trying to wrap their hands around what is it today and what will it be tomorrow. And that's exciting to have fresh ideas and fresh leadership. But we also have longstanding deans who are continuing to think about, our commitment to the state of Wisconsin. I say this all the time, and one of these days, every member of my team will likely say the same thing. We are Wisconsin first in everything we do. We recognize that we are a national and international draw. And so we have our core land grant mission that we're not losing sight of. And so if anything, we're doubling down. We're thinking about how do we get better in outreach and engagement in the rural communities around our state. That's a priority for us. We have as a priority, how do we better work here in our state with high ability, low income students? In fact, our chancellor just last week made an announcement that we are expanding what has been known as Bucky's tuition promise, a promise that said if you are at an income floor of a certain amount, the cost tuition is covered. We take care of that because of your income. The new Bucky's Pell Promise for students means that we cover tuition, room and board, and the resources there are expansive. And now our goal, our effort is to make sure that we are messaging as broadly as possible. But we have to do more than that. I'll give you a quick example. Just last week, I met with the superintendent of schools in the city of Milwaukee, our population center. And the 28 public schools in Milwaukee, we all agreed sitting around the table, we should be doing better in one, just telling the story of the resources and opportunities here at UW-Madison. And then what does it take to make sure that that message gets out? And so we we are crafting a campaign, if you will, of what are the potential recipients. What do they need to hear from us? I use that as an example, but that's an exciting one that's nuclear to my team and I. So that's a top priority. The third and last one I'll say, and this is sometimes lost at places like ours, because the question is, what's the next thing you're going to do? What is the next thing you're going to work on? What I'm asking my team to do the minute decisions go out the door is to really step back and reflect on what are those things we've been doing well for a long time? What are those things we're doing that we can improve on, but they're here right now, so that we don't lose sight of these important core exercises and experiences. And that, I expect, will relate directly to what is our core mission? Our core mission is to provide educational opportunities to lots of students, lots of learners. I mentioned enrolling 8,000 was really 8,100 students. Our first commitment is the region policy to have 3,600 of those students from the state of Wisconsin. So that's what I'm asking my team to look at. And so there's nothing new about that, other than we want to put some fresh eyes on how do we do it. So one, to make sure we're not forgetting any key elements of that work, but to also question, can we do it better? I heard a speaker many years ago, and I've never forgotten this, and it's a part of what I think about all the time. How do we better our best? Because I believe you can better your best. I mean, the idea is to always get better, but you don't want to throw out those things that you did well. You might want to refine them, shave them off, dust them off. But if you've done it well, the question is it applicable today and tomorrow?
I don't know if you've heard this. I forgot about this, but I heard this a long time ago. Good, better, best. Never settle for less until your good is better and your better is best.
There you go.
Sounds like what I'm hearing you say there. Great.
Yeah.
Friends, this concludes part 3. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Lynda, we're here to talk about Harvey Mudd. And didn't you kind of look at that for Sam for a second or two, or kind of vaguely remember that?
Well, I have to tell you, so the very first college fair we went to, way back when she was probably a freshman in high school, she came out of that and she liked 2 schools, the University of Abertay in northern Scotland.
I never heard this story before.
And Harvey Mudd. And so I doubled down on Harvey Mudd. I liked Southern California so much more than shipping her off to Scotland. But yes. And awesome. University of Abertay is wonderful, wonderful.
Sure,
it's just a little far for my taste.
I hear you.
But Harvey Mudd, wonderful school, definitely was high on her list.
Well, it's a pretty special place. And before I get into it, it's been over a month, I feel, since I was back here. And I just want to do a little brief overview again about the Claremont. So the Claremont College is, I believe, indisputably the best consortium in the country. And I say that because, when you talk to students, the consortium has more impact on their experience than any other consortium. Now, it's maybe a little sacrilegious. I'm probably losing my ATL card here, because the AUC, the Atlanta University Center, would be clearly to me the second best consortium, with Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse School of Medicine. Those are the only 2 that are completely walkable to take courses at any of them. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the concept of consortium, it's multiple schools together that form an arrangement where you can take courses at all of them in some capacity. Now, other consortiums that would be in the conversation would be the 5-college consortium with Amherst and UMass Amherst and Smith and Hampshire and Holyoke, and then also the Tri-College Consortium of Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, and Haverford, or the Quaker Consortium, which just basically adds UPenn to the list. But in my opinion, those sort of would be tied for third as terms of best consortiums. And Harvey Mudd is the most northern school. It borders Scripps to the southwest and Pitzer to the southeast. It's an hour from the ocean, 20 minutes from the San Gabriel Mountains, 30 miles east of LA. And as we said last time, Claremont, the city of trees and PhDs. And so you've got 6,000 students here amongst all of the schools, even though they're all quite small. 2,500 courses, 655 professors, 560 acres, all in 1 square mile, 17 dining halls, 2 different Division III sports teams. Scripps, Harvey Mudd, and Claremont all form 1 sports team, and Pomona and Pitzer form another sports team. By the way, if I was losing to those guys, I'd be like, what's up with the 3 schools in 1? But, they get away with it. So they've been doing it for a long time. All strictly undergraduate, 95 to 98% live on campus. And I'm giving you information for all the Claremonts here. No Greek life. And they share a lot of the same facilities, for example, libraries. Now, they do have different policies at each school when it comes to how many courses you're allowed to take at schools other than your base school, your home school. But, I've heard it explained like, think of it like cousins. They're like cousins, but, it's still your own home school and your own home room, and the cousin doesn't come into your room. So you have your home base, but you still have your cousins who you're close to. So I don't know if that works, but that's the way one of the Claremont leaders described it on our trip. So they also have 2 grad schools there. They have the Claremont Graduate School, of which one of my former students is getting a PhD, and the Keck Graduate School. But they're a little bit off and not really part of that core, but they're right there. So let's talk more specifically about Mudd. This is a really special place. I see why Sam was attracted to it. In my opinion, this is an absolute first choice option for any school. Like, I can see Harvey Mudd yielding over any school in the country if you want what they offer. So what is it that makes it so special? Well, all STEM majors. So if you're someone that wants math, science, engineering, chem, bio, physics, they are concentrated on STEM. Only 10 majors.
Right.
Very concentrated school. But it's also in the context of a liberal arts pedagogy. And so they really strongly believe in the exposure to both. So you're getting the social sciences, you're getting the humanities, you're getting the visual arts and performing arts, and you're getting all that, but it's STEM-based. And very few STEM-based schools like this are exclusively focused on undergraduates, like very few. Everybody takes a common core, which I'll say a little bit more about later. I mentioned the commitment to the humanities. To me, the thing that really, really makes it special, though, is the close and tight-knit community. It's the relationships that students have with teachers and that students have with each other. Lynda, when I was both at Caltech and at Harvey Mudd, I kept asking everybody, how is Harvey Mudd different than Caltech? How's Caltech different than Harvey Mudd? Because when you look at them, you've got these 2 schools with wicked smart kids, both highly selective, both really small, totally STEM focused, both in Southern California. In fact, the people at Caltech told me, everybody compares this to MIT, but we're most like Harvey Mudd or Olin. That's by their own acknowledgement. But when I would ask everybody what are the biggest differences, well, obviously the consortium does create a difference, but Harvey Mudd is just unapologetically committed to hiring professors who are teachers first, where at Caltech, they're more researchers first. Mm-hmm. And we got to have a breakfast with one of the heads of the departments. Can't remember what his area was, but I just remember he'd been there over 20 years. And he talked about, like, if you can't teach, I don't care, how scholarly and knowledgeable you are, like, you're not even getting to first base in our search process. So there's that commitment to being teachers is one of the things that really differentiates it, where Caltech, like, they're first and foremost researchers over there. Harvey Mudd is a family. Like, that sense that if you want to go to a place that feels like a family, this is it. Those relationships are are pretty powerful. And, I'm going to share a little bit more about that later, because we had a panel with students for an hour, and I was in my question asking mode there, Lynda, sorry. So I was firing on all cylinders. And I'll tell you how some of the students answered some of my questions in a sec. But, they try to do some things to reduce the stress, because it can be a stressful place. A couple of things that they've done recently is they have scaled back their core. In fact, they're now calling it a skinny core. It's still a core, but it's a skinny core. And that was partly in response to complaints about mental health and complaints about the level of rigor. They also have gone to pass no credit for first semester, and people did rave about that.
Helpful.
But once again, they're super committed to STEM, but also they're committed to 30% of your classes are social sciences, humanities, and the arts. And so they want to build scientists who see the consequences of their work. And that's how they put it when we were there. They believe in their honor code. They're really governed by their honor code. And another thing I love about the school is everybody either does a thesis or what they call clinic. And clinic, they would say, people say to them, do you have co-ops? They say, no, we don't have co-ops, but we think we go beyond co-ops with clinic, which is a really unique experience. So what happens is they have all these outside organizations that basically pay Harvey Mudd $50,000 to solve a research problem for a year. And this is mostly computer science and math and engineering majors. And so a number of students have patents that are developed at this time. Now, part of their agreement is they give away the intellectual property, but they have an agreement that you've got to list those students on those patents. They go on there. But that's like an unbelievable in-depth experience. And that's, if you're not in some of those majors, then you may have a senior thesis. It's a newer school, founded in 1955, when all this stuff was going on with Sputnik and Russia, the need to have real, true scientists. Now, look at the mission. The mission tells so much away about the school. So Harvey Mudd College seeks to educate right away engineers, scientists, mathematicians. Like, not many missions come right out and say that. So you know right away who they're about educating. Engineers, scientists, and mathematicians. But the next thing, well-versed in all areas and in the humanities, social sciences, and the arts. Like, they really pride themselves on that. Now, Caltech's got a real strong commitment to that as well. But both of these institutions have a much stronger commitment to exposure to disciplines outside of just STEM than a lot of other engineering schools. And then it goes on to say, assume leadership in their fields with a clear understanding of their impact in the world and in their society. So to me, being on that campus we were there about 4 to 5 hours, you feel the community, you feel it. Tremendous collaboration. Everyone is it's one of the things they look for in the admission process, and they're very clear about that. We look for people that want to be part of a community. You look for people that want to help other students. By the way, their humanities, social science, and arts, they just call it HSA. So you'll see HSA all over the place. And, you have these 39 different options to take what they call concentrations, which are basically minors. And here's where they tap into the consortium, because you don't have to take them all at Mudd. In fact, most people don't. Sometimes students are taking, a course at Pitzer and a course at Pomona and at Claremont and at Mudd all in one semester. So I'm just going to stop and take a breath for a second, see if you want to comment on anything. I got a lot more to say, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I like about Mudd is that they are unapologetic about who they are. And you see that in the mission statement. And that is one of the things that I know that my daughter really liked, is that combination of STEM along with the humanities. I really like that. And I just have to say that when you talk about the clinic and you talk about working with organizations on the clinic, let's be clear, some of those organizations are like Google and SpaceX and Amazon. So they get an opportunity to work with the most, the largest and most advanced companies out there. So it's an amazing opportunity, those clinic projects.
And that is totally spot on. I'm going to say a word about that toward the end. So I'll come back to that point. As far as I mentioned to you, they have only 10 majors. So they have bio, they have chemistry, they have comp sci, they have engineering, they have mathematics, they have physics, they have bio and chemistry combined, comp science and math combined, math and physics combined, math and computational biology. And sometimes when you push them and they say, you guys only have 10 majors, they say, oh, we have 11, because they allow for an independent study, which is a lot of people do the independent study to create that 11th major. Now, I want to go back to the student panel that I talked about. I try to, when I'm in a session like this, you don't want to dominate. I tell the students the same thing, but this was one where not that many people were asking questions. So I'm like, I was firing on all pistols there. It's going to be quiet.
Shy, I know.
No, if it's too much silence, I'm not trying to dominate, but if we wait a little silence too long, I'm popping my hand up. So one of the questions I asked the panel was, what did you not know until you got here? That's one of my favorite questions when I'm talking to students. So I'll just share some of the answers I heard to that. One student talked about how they were struggling at 1 a.m. on a physics problem. And they said out loud, because this person said, I'm not a physics person. This is killing me. And so they said out loud, I can't do this. And a random group of mutters, they call themselves mutters, a random group of mutters heard them, came up, stopped by, and worked with the student until 2 a.m.
Aw.
Isn't that pretty cool?
I love that.
I know. And so the student said, that is mud. And I did not know there'd be that level of collaboration, that level of support, to ever expect something like that would happen. Another student said that the curriculum is designed for you to not work on your own, but to collaborate. And they did not realize how much collaboration was involved. Another person said amazing research opportunities available to freshmen. Another person said, I'm surprised at how open the professors are and how they talk about their own journeys and how they'll support you. The student went on to talk about the professor coming to her play. Another counselor asked, what's work-life balance like? And lots of answers there. Varies. I go to bed at 1 a.m., the person said, but that's just me. That's my habits. My roommate goes to bed at 10 every day. But they did say the workload is strong. Of course, first year, you're really you're really into that strong core there. They say that they like to support each other. So sometimes when they see a freshman struggling, they go by the student and they say, pass, fail, Froshy. Pass, fail, Froshy. That's like a little phrase they use on campus to encourage the freshmen. Chemistry gets absolute rave reviews, atmospheric chemistry, climate science. Chemistry's won some serious awards. I'll mention one later, a little further toward the end. I want to say a little bit about the pay scale. So the median salary, $117,000 with a $20,000 bonus and a $7,000 high housing. Many years it's the highest in the nation. Friends, this concludes the first part of my college spotlight on Harvey Mudd College. We'll come back next week and have the final part. Hope to see you then. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'll continue a new series I've started where I'm doing reflections on decisions and trends I noticed in the decisions from the 2023 class. And we'll pick up with the second part of a 3-part interview I'm doing with Julia Shields-Rutna and Jonathan Hughes from MIFA on paying for college. And friends, as you make your decision at this time of year, I know there's a lot of pressure to just pick the most prestigious school, the most status-oriented school, the most selective school. And a lot of times that will be your best option, but it's not always your best option. But what is always your best option is to pick the school that is the best match for you, because college is a match to be made. It is not a prize to be won. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.